Hi, this is Mark Tucker,
And I'm Alan Furstenberg. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
How is it going, Mark?
It's been a good week. Lots, just busy with doing lots of different things. I got to work on a multi-platform game over the weekend, a voice game that hopefully will be done by November. We'll see.
Oh, fun.
Give you more details as it comes out.
I can't wait to talk about it when it does. But so you've been working on it. Is this a project you're working on yourself or working on it with a team? Or okay.
This is all a completely solo project. I started it a while ago, kind of as Number Spies ended its development. Then I had this other idea that I'd been working on for a number of years as far as the concept. I actually even pitched it to a couple different places, and it didn't seem like anybody was biting on it. And I'm like, this is just too good to not do. So I'm working on it, and
now I'm curious.
Yeah, it
sounds like it'll be fun. Okay.
But yeah, we'll be able to play against each other.
Ooh, sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, I'm definitely looking forward to this now. But this is going to be a weird question because I know this is the sort of thing that's really personal for a lot of people. Is what does your development environment look like? How, when you're developing these sorts of things, how do you do it? Because I know how I do it, and I've talked to other developers, and it seems like we all do it differently. So I'm kind of curious how you do it.
All right, sure. So I come from a mostly Microsoft background, actually, before I did voice. So I remember back when Visual InterDev came out and first incarnations of the web, and before .NET. So I was actually a Visual Basic programmer for a while. And so when .NET came out, I had a choice. Am I going to do C# or I was going to do VB.NET? And a couple of things pushed me towards the C# route. One, most of the examples were in C#. And two, that I didn't really like the syntax for the Visual Basic.NET. They were saying that it's the same and stuff. So that started my years and years of development with C# and more of a formal programming language with classes and full-blown Visual Studio IDE, and so that's what I developed in professionally at work and as a consultant for years and years and years and years. And so when I came across voice in 2016, I started looking around. And there weren't a lot of choices in Lambda at that time as far as different programming languages. You can do Lambda with C# and Python and Java even and stuff now. There seems to be some performance optimizations, or at least in the early days with Node and JavaScript. And I had some JavaScript background when I was doing some web stuff. So kind of like all the examples for the voice Alexa stuff was in Node. And
I was going to say, I know there are libraries for all of them, but it seemed like Node is the big one that they were pushing.
Yeah, so especially back in 2016, it was really just Alexa Skills Kit version 1. There wasn't a lot of other frameworks out there at the time. So that's why I went ahead and went with JavaScript and Node. Plus, there's a lot that I like about Node now that I've gotten into it. The whole Node package manager and all the different open source packages that you can pull in. There's just lots of different things that you can use to include and not have to code everything from scratch.
Now, let me ask you something. Since you're such a C# developer with the Visual Studio, using Visual Studio background, are you using TypeScript or are you sticking to JavaScript?
Actually, so mostly JavaScript. I have done a little bit of looking into TypeScript, and once again, that was kind of in the, when I made a pass to look at TypeScript, it was very first out, and there was a bigger difference because JavaScript didn't have classes back then, and so there's been some evolution in JavaScript itself where you can do classes and a number of things that's getting closer and closer to where I feel comfortable. So no to TypeScript right now. There's some sort of advantages to it, but it also slows me down, it seems like. So
no, I get it. Once again, this is interesting how our backgrounds are so divergent in some ways, and yet eerily parallel, because I've been a Java developer since literally version 0.9 of Java.
Mhm.
And as Java became more of a server thing, I was doing all my server work in Java. So all of my editors tended to be Java editors. And the editor I've kind of settled on and am working with at this point is IntelliJ IDEA, which
Okay.
again is a visual editor, mostly around Java support. But as I finally started moving more and more into JavaScript and eventually into Node, that was the editor I continued to work with because it
Right.
works fine with it. But I find it interesting that both of us came from these very heavily typed languages and yet settled on a very untyped language. Because
Yes.
I don't use JavaScript either, or I don't use TypeScript either at
Right.
this stage. Because I just, every so often I look at it and I go, oh, I really wish I had types, but I'm not ready to make that leap.
Yeah. So, well, and one of the things, crazily enough, that I just has won me over to JavaScript is JSON. It's just so easy
Yeah.
to whip up an object and add things to it, and the fact that you can have lots of APIs that return back JSON. It's just made things so much easier without having to do these heavy. Because I was back in the XML days, so you'd have to spin up a XML parser. Or
No, I mean, on one hand, XML is great because XML has types, and on the other hand, XML is horrible because XML has types. I mean,
yeah, it's very heavy, and
yeah,
and the fact that there's just so much code that I would have to write that was the let's get the thing in XML or parse the XML, and with JSON I don't have to do that.
nope, I get you.
So Alan, you were mentioning that then you came from this JavaScript world and you've settled on IDJ for the IDE, right? And
Yeah,
what are some advantages, I guess, to that environment?
I mean, versus VS Code, none in particular. I mean, I've done very little work with VS Code, to be fair, but that's mostly because I do most of my work on a Mac. So I come from a heavy Unix background, and working in Windows, or when I was working with Windows, it was at the time it was a very, very alien environment. It was very difficult to shift from Windows to Unix back to Windows and back and forth.
Right.
Whereas Mac since OS X has had Unix under the covers. So it was very easy for me to make that transition. Nowadays, I know the difference is a lot less, but that's where I came from.
Right. Yeah. No. So interestingly, since everything I did was in the business world with development, then for the longest time it's been Windows, and I've had a couple of chances, I guess, to switch to Mac, and I guess at this point it would slow me down once again because
Oh yeah,
I know where everything is, and there's just a lot that I do that I just know. And sometimes it runs into issues, like working on a team where we've got somebody that's on a Mac and I'm on Windows, and sometimes some of our scripts and things we have to tweak so that they work on both. So there's some annoyances there that I wish weren't there.
I wish, but at least we no longer really have to deal with silly issues like line endings and file names. That way back when, those were big problems when dealing with it. Now it's really, really easy to just say put it into Git and push it to a repository and check it out of the repository, and everything just works.
Yeah, so having gone through multiple different non-version controls at all to locking a single file so that nobody else can get it. So just everything to now to where Git is just so much better. But Git also has lots of complexities to it, and I'm definitely not the best Git command line person, and so one of the things I use is a tool called GitKraken. They're actually a local company out of Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, interesting.
But it's kind of like I guess Atlassian has like SourceTree or something like that, right?
I was going to say I use SourceTree, so I'm curious to hear more about GitKraken because I'm always trying to find nice cross-platform tools.
Yeah, so Git Kraken is, based on that, I guess that Electron base where you can, in the end, once the app is done, you can have it on Windows or Linux or Mac.
Very nice. So it gives you, I assume it gives you a visual representation of what the what your source tree looks, what the state of your repository looks like at a time.
Yeah, so I do all my branching and merging and PRs and things in that. It's got some nice diff and merge tools. And there also has like a more of a lightweight like task board or thing that's built into it. I don't really use that part of it much, but definitely a fan of the visual.
No, I'm a big fan of, I'm a big fan of the visual. It's funny, although IntelliJ has a Git management tool that's built into it and it understands Git very well, I almost always switch over to source tree in order to track what I'm doing. Yeah.
So same with Visual Studio Code. So because I guess came from a Visual Studio background, then Visual Studio Code was well, I tried some other like Sublime and I can't remember, Atom, some other ones, but really like Visual Studio Code. There's a number of different extensions that are available. In fact, I've coded a couple of extensions. So when you're dealing with AWS, there's config files that you have to remember where in the file system those configure files. So I created an AWS CLI Configure extension for Visual Studio Code, so it takes you right to where it is. It also gives you the ability to pick one of those and set that as your default configuration, and then it will make a backup copy of whatever it was, and then switch it to that as the default. So that's something that I've done, as well as there's also configuration for Ask CLI that I did an extension for.
So you deploy exclusively to AWS and Lambda, right?
Yes, I do. So even when I do cross-platform stuff, once again, I started with Alexa, and there are advantages to doing Lambda as your deployment for your node projects for Alexa. And so I've done that. And then I've also, on the cross-platform stuff, there's the ability to put an API gateway, which is just a REST front end in front of that Lambda. And so I do that, and that's where I point either Bixby or Google Assistant is to that webhook that then calls the same code.
Okay, so you don't point Alexa to the webhook, you're using the Alexa to Lambda directly. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, there's some advantages. There's some optimizations there, and it's pretty simple to set up and deploy that way. So it gets me up and going quickly, and then I can add the API gateway. I'm actually working on something that I want to do with the serverless framework, where I can set up maybe a template that has the ability to have that deployment across those three platforms, but point to the same code base with Jovo. So that's something that when I get to, eventually I'll get to it. But
no, it's interesting. I know that so most of my deployments are either AWS or Google Cloud and Google Cloud Firebase, and it really depends on what what the client wants or what I want to do. Most of my personal stuff I tend to deploy to cloud. Most, but not all, of my clients want to deploy to AWS. And for the ones that I deploy to AWS, I do everything through the gateway. I don't set up, I don't have a split one. This way I have a single code base, a single point of entry, and a single set of tools that are using that point of entry and monitoring the whole flow through. And not have to say, well, some are coming in here and some are coming in this function, and it's just more straightforward for me. Even though we know there's reasons why not to do it that way.
Yeah, no, I think it really just it depends on how you want to do it. So for me, I actually end up with, if I'm doing 3 different platforms, I end up with 3 different Lambdas. That's the same code that's deployed across 3 different Lambda functions, so that API Gateway 1 and 2 are for Bixby, and for Google point to each separate Lambdas, and then the Alexa points to the third Lambda. Even though it's all the same code base, there's 3 different functions. I just find that easier looking through the CloudWatch logs, or and stuff that everything's all one platform as opposed to mixed platforms.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And for me, I like having it all as one platform. This way, I'm only looking at one log and not trying to figure out, is it working the same on both? Is it?
Yeah, is it broken in one and not the other? Or yeah.
I like having one code path and one Lambda, and the minor variations where necessary.
Yeah, and I can see that too.
Yeah, no, they both make a lot of sense. Just it's your approach and what works best.
Sometimes what the client wants, right? Is that what you're going to say?
Well, yeah. Like I said, sometimes the client wants AWS and sometimes they want Google. And I'm biased, and I know I'm biased on the Google side. One of the things I really like doing though with Google is taking advantage of Firebase and Firestore, which have really nice integrations with cloud functions, and then using those to store basically the CMS configurations. So, all the responses, any configuration, anything, I like putting as much as possible into a configuration file and then storing that file on Firebase so that I can tweak configurations dynamically.
Yes, okay.
Well, one of the really nice parts of that is I don't need to configure the cloud function to Firestore or Firebase connection, because it has that built in. It knows what, as long as I'm in the same project, it knows where to go. And the neat thing about the Firestore and Firebase databases, as opposed to something like DynamoDB, is that they're what they call a real-time database. So if I make the change in the database, all the instances that were using that database get notified about the change. So
I see. Yeah.
They're not constantly making API calls. They're using an in-memory copy of the configuration. And when I change the configuration in the database, the configuration in memory automatically changes.
That's nice.
And that has some nice performance advantages to it.
Yeah, because I use a lot with environment variables on the Lambda function, and so I can make a change to that, but it's not until the next instance of the Lambda and the people that are on that next instance that something picks up.
And again, there are trade-offs.
That's a nice feature, yeah.
Yeah, there are certainly advantages to doing it that way, and there are advantages to sticking to one platform. I mean, I wouldn't want to deploy on AWS and then go hit Firestore. I could do it, but that starts getting to why? What's the point?
Yeah.
Why manage two projects when I could, when managing one can be tough enough sometimes.
So, as far as, I guess pretty much every project I have with AWS, has a Lambda, has DynamoDB for the user data store, has S3 for static audio files and images for APL. Of course, that gives me anything locked down with IAM and then API gateway if I'm going to do something else. Are there other things that you use in AWS when you work?
That's pretty much it. And when I'm on the Google side, I'm using mostly their equivalents. I tend to use the S3 equivalent cloud storage for. I tend to have a split. For dynamic files, I will use cloud storage. So stuff that is either created or the user uploads or that the system creates. For more static stuff, I will use Firebase Hosting. And that has the advantage, again, it ends up being in the same project. And Firebase has a pretty sophisticated hosting management system to go with it. So the website that I always create to accompany the skill or the action, that website is going to get deployed on Firebase Hosting. I'll give it its own custom domain name, but it's now part of the project. It gets deployed at the same time as a function is. I can tie the two together where it makes sense. If I've got additional APIs, they just get deployed along with the same name. So there's, simple,
that's nice.
Simple cores hosting, simple cores naming, so that's not a problem. So Firebase Hosting can be really useful for static files. For stuff that's more dynamic, I have to use cloud storage, which, it's fine. It makes sense. That's
Yeah.
what it's there for.
Yeah, no, it does sound nice that they've wrapped a lot of those things into one, because, I'm always then creating some separate project for, this is the website for my project, or this is the API layer, or.
Right. No, it's really nice to really just think of the API layer and the webhook layer and the website and all of that stuff really is just one thing that I, deploy, and sometimes if when I need to, upgrade in sync.
Yeah. Very nice.
Actually, that leads to an interesting question. How do you deal with version management? Because I know I don't deal with it well, I'll be honest.
Version management for like
skills, when you need to, when you're giving your skill a new version, some new features.
Oh, okay.
How do you
yeah, so there's a feature built into Lambda, which is Alias and Versioning. Ooh. So every time you deploy a new Lambda function, it gets a new version. You can turn on an alias, and so you can say version X is alias such and such, and so then you get a unique URL, or actually it's an ARN, right? Mm-hmm. Amazon resource name that includes that alias in it. And so when you're deploying your Alexa skill, then you deploy it with a specific version number as part of that ARN. And so then you can lock to a specific version. Plus I've got like different environments too. So I've got different things going on in different, like a local dev QA staging prod environment, depending on if it's a more of a side project versus a professional project. I'll have more stages, but so I do keep isolation in different environments with different databases and different deploys functions, so I don't break things. And then when it gets to the very end in production, then I can version each of the different functions. And so just more recently, I haven't had to do a lot with Google. But more recently, trying to work on different strategies the same way as how do I version this API gateway or the Lambda function that backs it, so that it's got that same capability of isolating one version from another version.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes it's nice because you can upgrade the back end and not do anything with the front end. Right. Front end being language model, so I can push changes without having to go through certification, as long as it's not a language model change.
Right. As long as we don't have to get recertified, we do as much as we can. I hear you there.
Yeah.
No, and it's largely the same scale. I mean, the biggest difference is usually I maintain two completely separate projects. And this is again so that I can just treat every each project as an isolated thing. And when I need to, I download the language model from my test project or my staging project, and then make some local changes to point to the new project ID, and re-upload those into the production project.
So what's really nice, since I do Jovo with cross-platform, and Jovo has their own CLI, there's a number of advantages that I get. And one of them is that you can define in a configuration file right in your project this concept of stages. So you can say, this local stage is going to go against this local webhook, which is really a proxy that's going to go back to my development laptop, so I can debug locally. But it also goes through this tool called a web-based Jovo debugger, which captures the request and response, and you get a nice visual. As you're talking and doing this local testing, you get to see visually not only like what is the request and anything that's in session state and anything that's in the user database on the request side of things, but after, when it comes out on the response side, you get to see that same thing. And it's version history, so you can go back and click on previous steps in the conversation, and you get to see the state of those things at that point in time. Huge help when you're debugging things. So, big fan of that, but this idea of different stages that I can define in this config, that I can build a specific stage, which, takes my language model and my configuration and builds all that stuff locally on my machine. And then I can do a Jovo deploy and deploy a specific stage, which would then push the language model and skill information to the Alexa developer console, if that's the case, and then push it out to a Lambda function for the code changes. in the case of with Google, that it does a zip file that's a Dialogflow version 2 that I can go in and update my my entities inside of Dialogflow and just restore over top of everything, and then that's updated. There's a way you can do it more automated, but I usually don't go through the work of doing that last little bit. It'll be interesting with the Action Builder updates that Jovo has built in now to see how that automation has become faster. I haven't had a chance. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go back and look at that.
You talked about using a proxy. The proxy that I use called ngrok. One of the things I really like about ngrok is that it has a web inspector, so that you can same way you can see what the requests are and what your responses look like. So I will always go into it and look at what the JSON that they're sending me is, and how does it match what the documentation says should be there, and what is the state that it represents, and what am I sending back, and does it match the format that's supposed to be there, and so forth. No, ngrok and its inspector is one of the big tools that I use for developing all my actions, developing all my skills, and for developing my library like multivocal. So it's very much one of my key tools that I use.
Yeah, I chuckle a little bit because the Alexa Skills Kit, SDK, there's a whole series of files for that. But one of the recent things that they've released is this local debugging, and I just have to kind of chuckle because they use some sort of a proxy. I'm not sure if it is ngrok or not behind the scenes, but I'm like, I've been doing this for 2 years. I don't know how anybody else coded this stuff without
I don't know how you can.
being able to do that. Yeah.
I used to give people directions like, go look at what the JSON you're sending back is, because what you're telling me doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's like, okay, do a lot of console logs and look in CloudWatch. I'm like, if you're not able to set breakpoints and debug your code local, then that's challenge. So yeah, luckily for the most part, I've been able to, at least until recently, been able to hook up my devices that are on a completely different personal Amazon account, so that I could set up a beta test actually, and then early on, so even if it was a local debug pointing to my proxy, I could talk to my Alexa device and have that go through and debug locally. But there's been some things that they've changed with that's kind of broken that.
See, this is one of the nice things. This is one of the nice things on the Google side, is that while you're developing, as long as you are any device that is permitted to the same account that you're developing with, has access. So as soon as you test it using the built-in tester, or I think now even as soon as you deploy to test, it's immediately available on all your devices.
Yeah, that's the true for me too. But I have a number of different development accounts, and I don't want to have to keep swapping which device is on which account. Because I've got professional stuff, I've got side project things, I've got personal side projects. So it was just nice to have all of my devices available that are already on my personal account, be able to be used for development. Yeah, if I went and personally connected an Echo Dot to my Shazaml Dev account, then I could just use that device out of the box without doing the beta test route. But
and I don't know, maybe this is different. Maybe we are talking the same thing. One of the things that you can do is on the Google side is you can just permit the development to more than one account. Or you can set up alpha and beta channels and say, here's the list of accounts that have access in alpha and beta channels.
Yeah, so I can do that as well. Okay. And that's part of the, I guess, my setup with different stages, since I have different accounts and you can have same emails share across those accounts, then I can configure into each of those different things. But when it comes to devices, it's a little bit different. My workflow has just been messed up lately because of some changes that they've done. What they're doing is they're tightening up beta testing, that there's a series of verification tests that they want run against your endpoint to verify that it's kind of passed some easy tests that you need to pass before you certify. But they're pushing that now available, or making that have to happen before a beta test, but there is no alpha test.
That's interesting.
available for Alexa. So it's just, I'm a little bit grumpy about it because I've been doing this for years and now they're just messing it up. And
No,
I have to figure out a different way of doing it.
It's interesting because Google's approach on that is alpha testing, you don't need to submit to review.
Yep.
Beta testing, you need to submit to the exact same review that you would need to submit to prod. The advantage, though, is once you pass it in beta test, you can now release it at any point.
Right.
So if you wanted to,
and I actually like that model quite a bit better, to be honest. So, yeah, what Alexa's done is there's a development version of a skill and a live version of a skill, and but that's not enough.
Yeah.
Different environments, well, if they follow that around, and I could add my own, local QA, staging, blah blah blah, then I'd be happier with that. But
the problem with Google's approach is that there is development, alpha, beta, production. There's no easy way to say, for example, the development version points at this fulfillment and the alpha version points at this different fulfillment. Yeah. And the beta version and the production version then points at a different one still.
Yeah.
Because changing the endpoint changes the system.
It's all together. Yeah.
Yeah, there were some ways that in theory you could do it in Dialogflow or with the assistant Dialogflow connection, but those now broke with Actions Builder.
So no, it seems like things are breaking all over. But
we will talk about breaking things all over in the Google side another day, because that will take the whole show.
Oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Just to finish, I guess, my thought on the Jovo stuff, part of the reason why I like the fact that it is cross-platform, I've mentioned, I guess, Jovo a number of different times. No surprise that I'm a big fan, but there's just a number of different plugins, so you can make it extensible. And there's a place you can go called the Jovo Marketplace, and you can see all the different plugins. And so, for example, I've created one for speech markdown and one for Sentry, which is a tool where it will capture exception logs in my Lambda and push those out so that I can easily determine if something broke while I'm running it in production. Plus, I created a GitHub repository called Jovo-community, where I've got some validators, so you can validate input for speech coming in, and so I created some validators and some additional tools. I also have a Jovo plugin for time zone, so it's an easy way to get to the time zone. Except for if you're on Google, then what you can do is you can set default time zones, and you can also set default time zones based on the country from a locale. And since you get a locale, then at least you can get set a time zone that's close to the locale that you're in, without having to go through all API calls and figure out all the turtle jumping to get time zone in Google Assistant, which I do not do.
And it occurs to me that works for like every locale except for English US and English Australia. I think every other locale just has one time zone. I have to think about that now. That's a good point.
So that might be a way to go across the edge. So you can set a default, for if it's such and such locale, then you use this time zone, and then you don't have to do the jumping through hurdles of trying to figure out what the real time zone is.
Which will, anyway, which we've talked about before.
We have talked about.
Although your comment about capturing error logs reminds me, how do you do analytics of your skills?
Right. So there are some built-in analytics, but there are a number of different Jovo plugins for analytics, including something called Dashbot. So I've done that. I've also even rolled some kind of in the earlier days with Google Analytics, and there's some things I actually kind of like about that approach. So I don't know. There's right now it's Dashbot, and there's a free version that I can get, which gives me some of the things that I want. But I'm still open to to
No,
a different analytics provider.
I was a big fan of Dashbot back when I first discovered them, and I still use them to some extent. And I use Google's Analytics a little bit. I've always had some issues actually accurately reporting things to them. I would often get things decide to suddenly disappear because they changed their validation and they no longer believed that I was coming from a Samsung mobile device, which I wasn't. It's okay. So it's interesting to see analytics were mostly on the same track and mostly still trying to figure out really good ways of doing it. But yeah, Dashbot's one of the better ones that I've seen and worked with.
Yeah, but they obviously they need to make money, and they've been at it a while, and it's been challenging. So a number of different features they've pushed into paid tiers, and there's also limited. There's ways around that. For if you've got a small project that you're starting on, you can create a brand new account for that, and then I think you get up to 3 apps that you can.
I don't remember the numbers anymore. And
so that's kind of where I start with the project, and then if it grows more, then I can go ahead and switch on a paid thing if I need to for clients.
Yeah, I know one of the great things about it though is that it actually shows you how people are actually flowing through your skill or action, not just how you think they're going to be flowing through your skill or action. And that's
and it's also kind of fun to turn it on to live fire hose and just kind of watch people use your. So that's fun. Let's see if there's anything else I've got on my list. So Alexa Developer Console, I use a couple of different extensions. One from the Alex from the Jovo team, which I don't think's out yet. I'm doing a beta of that, so I get to do some additional features of the testing inside with the different. I guess making the conversation happen during simulation mode. There's some additional shortcuts there. I talked about different extensions of Visual Studio Code. I think I talked about basically what my environment's all set up.
I think that's pretty much my environment as well. And again, since I'm mostly doing action stuff, I tend to rely on the console a lot for the debugging and seeing how things flow through rather than, no, that's not true. I guess I did say that I rely on ngrok for that a lot as well. So
yeah. So yeah, a lot of things with the Jovo CLI for me, which it calls some different things behind the scenes too. So that works out nice. Oh, one of the things that we didn't talk about is unit testing. One of the things that I do, since it's Node, then I've got a number of things available for unit testing. So that would be things like Mocha and Chai, which are standard unit testing stuff for JavaScript code. But then different things for mocking out classes or objects or code. So I do that. And then one of the things that we use is Bespoken Tools has a code to go ahead and allow you to simulate sending commands to your devices. So sending intents or utterances that map to intents.
What I tend to do, what I do is for a lot of my a lot of the webhook testing that I'll do is I'll use ngrok to I'll capture the JSON that I send using ngrok, and either I'll use ngrok again to resend it over and over until it gives me the output I want, or I'll copy the JSON and then send that separately through my test tool. So I've got a bunch of JSON files representing known states and to some extent what I want the result JSON to look like. I don't have a really good way to compare what I want the result in JSON to look like though. So I'm still trying to find really good JSON diff tools that let me say, I care about this part and I don't care about this part.
Yeah, have you, this is interesting. Have you looked at JSONATA at all? JSONATA.
That's a new one for me.
So it's you can go to JSONATA and there's like a try tab. You can post JSON on the left-handed side, but then you can execute queries against your It's kind of like, in some cases, like a SQL. It's not the same SQL syntax, but it's kind of the same concept. You write a query against that JSON and you can extract different parts out of it. So maybe you could use that to extract parts out of your JSON and then use something else to div just that part or something.
Yeah, some of what I do right now is I've got tools in multivocal that let me extract, the value at the end of a path, a JSON path. So I extract it from, so I have lists of check these paths out and see how and do diffs against those paths. But it's cumbersome and not always as useful as I'd like it to be.
Yeah, so you could might be able to use something like JSON Auto, or there's other ones out there that would be, now you specify what the query is that would be executing, and then you would use that to get to the JavaScript, to the JSON actually. But so that's something. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is since you have in Alexa just as short 7 seconds or less, you got to be careful with how many API calls and stuff you make.
Yes.
So number of things that I try to do with caching in session or in user storage, so that when I pull back information that I don't have to make multiple calls. But one of the things also is if you've got some things that your Alexa skill is bigger than a part of a bigger process, and it's making API calls, but it's not something that the skill itself needs. It just the skill is triggering it. So basically, you can treat it in an asynchronous fashion. I've started using Eventbridge, so I created a Lambda function that is triggered. So Eventbridge is like an event bus. So I can just send a message or one or more events based on something, and then have some Lambda function, some other Lambda function wake up, pick it up, and process it. And so there's been a project I worked on recently where there would be different things happening, and then the Alexa skill would just trigger some other process that was happening behind the scenes by just sending an event bridge message. And so it's very quick to just send that asynchronous message. It doesn't need to know anything about it other than, here, I sent this thing.
Yeah, it's a fire and forget, yeah.
Yeah.
On the Google side, I've done the same sort of thing using Google's pub sub. And again, it's, you fire it off and some other function is going to take care of it. You don't care what.
Yeah.
One of the nice things that I actually tend to do with Google Functions for those sorts of things is I delay them all until after I send back the reply to, in fact, for anything that doesn't actually have to go back to the action or the skill that sends back to the user, I delay that until after I send back the reply. So the function will keep running after it sends back a reply for a few more seconds. And that's where I handle things like logging and analytics stuff and anything that I need to, that's fire and forget, because that will run for a little bit longer and I get a faster trivial response time. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, nice. Well, I've learned some different things. I certainly have. That was fun. And I think this, a bunch of tips. We started covering a bunch of our little tips and tricks, and I think we'll be talking about some more of those again in the future. I think we need to. There's definitely some different things. Sometimes I don't even realize what I'm doing since I've been doing this for long. So it'd be nice to think about it and kind of like try to isolate some of those things. No, it's the sort of thing where, I've had people ask me questions and I'm like, oh yeah, this is not, they're not going to tell you how to do this, but you can piece it together. And I think if we can start helping people piece it together, once again, we're going to have people making better and better stuff. So, if you're doing some great stuff out there that you want other people to know about, if you've got your tips and tricks, we encourage you, share them however you want, or share them with us. And we're happy to pass them along and, point people in your direction as well. Yeah, I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to learn as well. I agree. Well, this has been a great episode of Two Voice Devs. Appreciate you for watching or listening, and keep doing voice development. Take care, everyone. All right, take care.